Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today, the 9 elements of a person-centered system. So my name is Sashka, and I co-direct the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems, known as NCAPS, with my colleague, Bevan Croft. And I will provide a quick visual description of myself. I am a white woman, and I have dark red hair. You can't see it. And my hair is a little questionable today. I will admit that. And I am wearing a black top and sitting in a mostly white room with some blinds behind me. So today's webinar is sponsored by NCAPS. And NCAPS is jointly funded by the Administration for Community Living and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and is administered by a team at the Human Services Research Institute. Our webinars are always free and open to the public. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your pets. We'd love to have them here with us and continue to expand the great community that we have built over the years. If you are not familiar with our work at NCAPS, the mission of our center is to promote systems change that makes person-centered principles not just an aspiration, but a reality in the lives of people across the lifespan, including older adults and people with disabilities receiving long-term services and supports. Here at NCAPS, we really focus on the tangible application of person-centered practices within systems and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. We provide free technical assistance to state human service agencies looking to improve their person-centered planning processes. We host free learning collaboratives to bring states together to engage in peer-to-peer learning around various topics within the person-centered practices space. And we also have a free resource library of over 40 different toolkits, guidance documents, blogs, and much more developed by subject matter experts that you can access on our website. And that includes the 9 elements of a person-centered system blogs that we're going to be talking about today. And we'll get the links to our website and the blogs put in the chat after we talk through some webinar logistics. So you may have seen that Laura has already put in chat that all attendees are muted throughout the course of today's webinar. We strongly encourage you to use chat to ask questions and engage with the hosts and other participants. We will have time at the end of the webinar today to talk through any of the questions that you have that you put in the chat while we are going through the webinar, or even some of the questions that you submitted through registration. This webinar is being live captioned and is also being interpreted in Spanish. Live English captions can be accessed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And live Spanish interpretation can be accessed by clicking the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, which should be a world icon. If you are accessing the Spanish channel, once you are in there, you'll want to go ahead and silence the original audio. And we'll have some polls throughout today's webinar, so please be prepared to interact with those. We do really value your feedback and use it to help in the development of any future webinars. If you have any follow-up questions after the end of today's webinar, you can reach out to us at ncapps@hsri.org. Please note that we do not monitor that email address during the webinar. So if you have any technical issues or questions, please feel free to reach out directly to us in the chat box, which we will be monitoring. Also, you should have seen when you registered, but our webinars are not officially approved for continuing education credits. We do provide a confirmation of attendance email in case you work for an organization that you would like to use participation in this webinar for internal requirements or credits. And that confirmation of attendance will be automatically sent to you through Zoom in 24 hours. And it will also include a link to the recording of today's webinar, along with the slides and the 9 Elements blogs that we are going to be referring to today. And if you want to catch up on any of our past webinars, which I strongly encourage you to do, you can find the recordings and materials on our website at ncapps.acl.gov. All right, so before we officially get started, we would like to know who is in the audience with us today. So you should see a poll pop up for you in a few seconds here. It's up. We are ready to go. There's a couple of different roles that we'd like you to check if you identify with them. So the first role is a person with a disability or someone who uses long-term services and supports. The second role is a family member or loved one of a person who uses long-term services and supports. The third is self-advocate or advocate. The fourth is peer specialist or peer mentor. The fifth is social worker, counselor, or care manager. The sixth is researcher or analyst. The seventh is community or faith-based service provider organization. The eighth is a government employee, whether that's federal, state, tribal, or municipal. And you may have other identities and roles that you hold that are not reflected in this poll, and that's because we can only do so much with a poll. So if you do have any other roles that you would like to share, please feel free to put those in chat. And we'll wait here until we hit about 80% responses. Thank you for your quick participation today. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll here and share the results. So we have around half government employees joining us today. Welcome. 37% in terms of social workers, counselors, or care managers. A number of family members, people with disabilities, self-advocates, peer specialists, researchers, analysts, and community or faith-based service provider organizations. Thank you so much for your responses and welcome, everyone. We're really glad to have you here. Okay, so now on to the good stuff, right? I'm going to stop boring you with logistics. I am very pleased to introduce our 2 panelists for today's webinar. First, we have Bob Sattler. Bob joined Support Development Associates in 2007 and became a partner of the company in 2016. Over the past 40 years, his career has focused on building person-centered community supports. Bob currently consults across the nation to help people move to more community-integrated settings and assist states and organizations with creating sustainable person-centered systems and processes. Next, we have Alva Gardner, who is a speaker and trainer who uses her unique lived experience as a woman with a disability to infuse her speeches, trainings, and consulting work with impactful and real-life examples. Alva runs her own company, the 4-3 Perspective, and works as a person-centered thinking trainer, disability inclusion activist, and consultant, supporting organizations and companies to make systemic changes that improve the work they do and the way all people can be supported, and especially those people with disabilities. So welcome, Bob and Alva. We're so excited to have you here and learn from you today. So with that, we'll go ahead and take down our slides so Bob can share, and just want to again encourage the audience members to please feel free to put any questions in chat throughout today's webinar, and we'll have some time at the very end to address those. So I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Saskia. And as Saskia said, my name is Bob Sattler. I'm with Support Development Associates, also known as SDA, and I've been with the company 16 years now, and have really focused on supporting people and systems to really be more person-centered, which I will get into in just a moment. A little identifying information about me. I am a white male, older, just turned 62 today, have gray hair, gray beard, go by he, him pronouns, and I'm wearing a blue shirt, and I'm in a virtual office. So my office looks nice and clean and organized. So I'm not going to show you my real office, but that helps put things into perspective. And hopefully my experience will be helpful as we go through our time today. So I will turn it over to Alva, and then we will go ahead and get started.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alba Gardner. I am a white woman with brownish blonde hair that is currently pulled back in a bun. I am wearing a purple mock neck turtleneck sweater, and a gold necklace and green glasses. I am the founder and owner of the Fourth Way Perspective, and as someone with lived experience who's been in the service system since I was 6 months old, and also worked in the service system as a direct support professional, I really come to this work with a unique perspective and a unique take on it. And I'm excited to be here with you all this morning and presenting with a longtime friend and colleague, Bob, for the first time.
Thanks, Alva, and we are looking forward to presenting with you today. And we have a lot to talk about in a very short time. And first and foremost, I would really like to thank NCAPS for this opportunity and posting our work on their website. Hopefully you will find it helpful. And thank you for all the happy birthday wishes. I appreciate that. And couldn't be a better way to celebrate a birthday than talking with you all. So thank you for that. So really want to think about the 9 elements of a person-centered system and relating it back to, as we think about person-centered practices, I think one of the things we've done traditionally is focused all of our energy on developing person-centered plans for people. And we thought we develop a person-centered plan with people, they would have great lives, they would have opportunities, and the system would miraculously change. But what we have learned is that person-centered planning really was focusing on one person at a time. And there's a lot more than just one person in the system. And the planning process really became an add-on to what we were required to do for state requirements. And doing it with one person at a time and having it outside of the system, it didn't really create the changes we had hoped to see. What had happened is it resulted in additional work for those who are providing the supports. And by focusing on one person at a time, that meant that many more people were not receiving this creative approach to planning. And so perhaps some people got the chance to have a better life if the support team was committed and active to make that happen. And while many had a nice plan, there really was no change to their lives. And unfortunately, many more people didn't even have that opportunity. It's something that we really need to look at, to really think about what we can do to support people so it's across the board.
And I think the biggest issue with that is that, like Bob was saying, it ultimately fell and falls to the individual and or their circle of support. And if it's the individual and how established or developed their sense of self or sense of self-advocacy or practice in self-advocacy is, as to how much of a person-centered approach or person-centered plan they are experiencing and having the opportunity to get. So if they don't have that team around them or that one person advocating on their behalf, it's not very likely that that's happening for them unless the organization or program that they are being supported by really is taking that holistic across the board approach. And the impact that ultimately has on people receiving services is that on top of what they're already living with and dealing with day to day as with a disability, they're now having to, again, on top of that, advocate for something that should be just being provided across the board.
And so that really has been a challenge. And one of the things I really appreciate about working at Support Development Associates, which is based upon the work of Michael Small, who's the founder of our company, is he really had a focus and a mindset to think about how can we take person-centered planning to scale. So it's not just one person at a time, it's everybody. And how do we really make that happen? And that means it's going to take some time. And it's going to require sustained leadership that's really committed to these changes. And it's going to evolve as things go on. In fact, it's already started to evolve back in 2014 when Medicaid and the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services issued the Home and Community-Based Services Community Settings Rule that was really focused on what can we do to support people and have a person-centered system. And that means everyone who's utilizing waiver supports is required to have that person-centered plan. And unfortunately, while the regulation was initiated in 2014, with that expectation that person-centered planning would happen, here we are in 2024, and we're still trying to figure out what that planning process really looks like. And how do we capture the information that is important to the person, those things that make the person happy, content, satisfied, fulfilled, as well as the stuff that we've been very good at documenting, the stuff that is important for people, the stuff that's related to health and safety and being valued. And how do we really find a balance between the two of them? We've been so focused on capturing health and safety information that we haven't really captured the stuff that creates happiness for somebody. And so we're in a catch-up game right now, trying to figure out how do we document that. And so we've got a lot of catch-up to do. And one of the focuses of taking this to scale is really thinking about what can we do to move our system from a power over system to a power with system. And as we think about that, you know, I've come to the realization that we have really built our system with the mindset of the golden rule. Let's treat others the way you want to be treated. And that's great. It's got a lot of good intentions, but what happened is I may not want to be supported the way you want to be supported. I may not want to be treated the way you want to be treated, and vice versa. While it was full of good intentions, what it really did, it led us down a path of designing a system where we had control and we offered what we wanted, because that's the golden rule. Let's treat others the way we want to be treated. Again, good intentions, but it didn't accomplish what was wanted or needed, as Alva just mentioned. So if we really want to make that switch, what we really need to do is really think about being truly person-centered. We need to move beyond the golden rule to something that I call the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. And this is where we really need to discover what people want. And then we work together to create it. So that helps move us from a system of power over to a system of power with. And it requires that we look at the assumptions that underlie the system that we've created. This idea that professionals know best, it needs to be challenged. And as well as the assumption that we're here to fix people. People don't need to be fixed. The reality is we all need to be supported. And so how do we create a system that makes that happen? The final rule from CMS has really helped move us in that direction, because we are now needing to recognize what people want in their lives, those things that are important to people. We need to be documenting that. We need capturing that. Again, those things that make people happy, content, satisfied, and fulfilled. And we are still required to capture the stuff that's related to health and safety. But now we really need to be thinking about how do we relate that health and safety in context with happiness, so we create a good balance between the two. And that is an evolution that we are still working on. And as we think about this, when we think about what's important to people and what's important for people, they really influence each other and they're connected. The reality is nobody does things that are important for them, their health and safety, if it's not connected to something that's important to them. And we really need to find out what that connection is, which means we need to discover more than we have in the past. We need to ask different questions. We need to have a different mindset as we look at things. And the reality is we need to look at and discover what's important to people first, the stuff that makes people happy, and then address it into the context of what is important for people. You know, I have a friend, and this works for everybody. These concepts really are human-centered and human-focused. I have a friend who has a teenage son, and she would come into work always complaining that her son wasn't smelling too good. You know, teenage years, should be taking a shower every day, should be wearing deodorant, isn't. And so nothing she did would get him to wear deodorant. And she was really frustrated. And then she came into work one day, all smiles and giggles, and said, "You would not believe it. I smelled my son coming down the hallway to breakfast this morning, and he smelled great. He had deodorant on, he had cologne on." And as she was talking to him, she discovered there's a girl at school he likes. So his important two had him do the important four. And so we really need to think about, as we are doing our planning and designing services and supports, how are we pairing these two things together? And we need to move beyond just the health and safety, which a lot of our focus has been on. And that's really where we came down to really looking at what are these things that really need to be in place to make this all work well. If we want the final rule to become a reality, how do we make that happen? Because it covers all parts of the system. As I said at the very beginning of this, we started with a concept of let's do a person-centered plan, and we put all of our thoughts and efforts into that basket, that person-centered planning basket. And so we got beautiful plans that more times than not just resulted in better paper and not better lives. And part of this, I think, is because we never incorporated other parts of the system in the planning process. And coming from the provider standpoint, what I always found is we would create these great person-centered plans, but it really ended up being a whack-a-mole game as we tried to put it into place. Familiar with the whack-a-mole game at the county fairs? You know, we have this great idea with a plan with outcomes that people want, and as we try to implement it, a mole pops up. Oh, we got funding issues. So we bash that funding mole over the head, and then a regulatory one pops up. So we hit that one over the head, and we're constantly addressing those moles rather than thinking about why don't we look at all of this together? Because everything fits together, and we haven't done that. We've had a very siloed approach. So that led us to really think about what are those 9 critical elements that a system really needs to look at. And so I want to spend the rest of our time going through those elements very quickly, because we could spend a day on each of these things, and we don't have that much time to do that. So I'll quickly give you the highlights. And you'll notice that we decided to think about these elements as elephants, because they really are the elephants in the room. But now as I think about it, and I think of the whack-a-mole game, maybe we should have done moles instead. But I think elephants are more majestic, and our system certainly is majestic. So let's really think about what those 9 elements are and how we should start to approach them. So the 9 elements really focus on leaders, mission and vision and values and advocacy and trauma, outcomes and cultural considerations, engaging supporters, organizational culture, alignment, and quality management. And typically, we only focus on 1 or 2 of these elements, but all 9 of these are required. And they begin and end with leadership, because leaders not only need to sign up for this, but they need to stay engaged. One of the gurus of change, Rosabeth Moss Kanter, says that when we are in a change effort, the beginning is really exciting and the end is really satisfying. The middle is like going through mud. And that's where we stop our efforts. So we really need to think about how do we make it through the mud so we get that satisfying result. So we need active, engaged leaders to get us through the middle, and it helps us sustain the momentum. Leaders at the organizational level, leaders at the state system level. We really need to think about that. But we also need to be working on these 8 other elements as we go through this. So leaders is just one of those 9 elements. So let's really look at this and see how we may be thinking about how are we doing as it impacts the settings rule and now the access rule. We need to be looking at these as a joint effort. So first element is vision, mission, and values. And, you know, as the Cheshire Cat said, if you don't know where you're going, any direction will do. And so we really need a vision that creates the direction that we're going by describing what the destination is. Do we know what that is? Why are we doing this? The vision and mission is the why of the work, and our values describe the key behavioral elements of the desired cultures that we want to create. And they need to work together. We start with our vision. It's where we're going and why we exist. And is it compelling to those who are going and want to go in that direction that we want them to go in? And more importantly, do people know what it is? That's really critical. Where are we going? And then once we know where we're going and why we're going, the vision really is our why, as Simon Sinek talks about. We really want to think about what are we going to do to reach that vision? And that's where our mission comes in. So it provides the how that gets us to the why. And when we use those, it really helps us focus our energy and it gets us moving in the direction we want. And then we really want to use values. I know many of us have values written, but are we using the values to monitor and hold people accountable to the day-to-day behavior? It helps define and reinforce the desired organizational culture we want. And if they're routinely used, it can help to establish and maintain those day-to-day expectations of how the organization operates. Person-centeredness shouldn't be, I'm becoming a person-centered organization, or I am a person-centered organization. Those are buzzwords. What we really want to see is, this is how we do our work. It's who we are. And one simple thing that we can look at from a value standpoint, values, we need to think about, does the language we use activate the values that we talk about? Let's think about language for a moment. Language is one of those things that really is at a disconnect with our values. We use very controlling language. We will allow somebody to do something. We will give somebody that ability to do that. We will tell somebody to do something rather than let's discuss things. Let's share some information. Let's remind people rather than prompt people. Simple thing. When we use terms such as clients that we provide support to, it's a great word, but how many hoops do we make those people jump through if they want any changes in their life? Do they truly have the power of being a client? We really need to think about how we align our values with our actions and our language, so we can think about what we can do to make that happen. When we think about the second element, that's related to advocacy. And we've done an interesting thing with advocacy. When we think about advocacy, we often think about adversarial relationships. We think about it's a fight. And honestly, the way the system is operated, we've caused people to act in a retaliatory way or a defiant way to really make change happen. I think Alva's got some stories. I know Alva's got some stories about that. So I'll just give a quick general about this, and then we'll have Alva give some thoughts about this. But what we really want to think about when we think about advocacy, it really is a needed role in the system because it starts to address the status quo and it helps us to recognize where things are working well and where things need to be modified. And so it's important to understand and appreciate that role and really recognize that we are all partners in this to move things together. And as we think about advocacy, we really want to be mindful of how are we approaching that. And Alva, I think you had some questions that you wanted to pose to folks.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to advocacy, like Bob was just saying, we need to really be asking ourselves if we are in the position of direct support professional or manager or whatever your role at the organization is is how is that advocacy happening? And is the type of advocacy that the people we're supporting want, it is the advocacy that we're providing done so in a way that the people want. And in my experience, organizations and leaders come up with their own interpretation of how to advocate on behalf of the people that they're supporting without really engaging the people that they're supporting, the people that attend their programs, in coming up with what does that advocacy look like for you? How do you want that advocacy to happen? And the conversation really needs to change to be one that is more collaborative, right? Asking people that attend our programs, what change do you want to see? And I would say more importantly, what role do you want to play in making that happen? Right? We're not making these changes independent of the people that we're supporting. They need to have a role in making that change. And I want to just quickly tie it back to what Bob was saying earlier about the golden rule versus the platinum rule. I often say that people that work in the system who don't experience disability themselves, while they have great intention and they come to this work with good intention, if they don't live this reality, their interpretation of what we as people with disabilities want and the way we want it is not going to be aligned more often than not, unless these conversations are being had and unless the people receiving services and living this reality help us define what that looks like.
And as we think about advocates, we really need to be mindful that there really are two types of advocates that we want to look at. One is looking at external advocates. And so how are we building allies outside of the system, those folks who are local, who have the real life experiences that Alva was just talking about, that can be role models for us. And this may put them at odds with the state system because they may see things differently. Of course, they're going to see things differently. And they don't have all the knowledge and the experience that those in the system have and all the regulatory things that they are dealing with. And so how do we really think about creating allies that share experiences and share the knowledge so everyone's on the same page? I'm a firm believer that knowledge is power. And I know there are some people who believe that if I have all the knowledge, I have all the power. I tend to look at it a little differently. If we all have the knowledge, we all have the power. So let's think about how we can do that. And so as we're thinking about that, that is where external advocates can be very helpful. But to really make things happen, as Alva was mentioning, we also need to be mindful of the internal advocates. And when we think about internal advocates, there really are three types of advocates that we want to look at. First and foremost is those who are using our services and supports, people themselves with lived experience. We want to think about their family members and those who are paid to provide the supports, our direct care staff, who really are where the rubber meets the road. And what are we doing to really engage them? Alva was mentioning a lot about how we go about that. When I was a provider and had a service agency, which, by the way, I started because I was tired of people telling me, you can't do that. You can't do that. I said, let me show you how we can. And one of the things we did is, and Alva, I don't think you know this, I would have meetings with those who were, as executive director, I would have meetings with people who were receiving our services and supports.
Mm.
And it would actually be co-chaired by someone who was receiving our services and supports, and was a group that we called the Brainstormers.
Nice.
And every month, people would come and talk directly with me as the executive director about how things were going with our organization, how our services were, what supports were in place, what we needed to be doing differently. We turned it into a potluck so people could share their skills about what they've been learning, had some great times, and it really created a collaborative process that we were truly offering what people wanted because we were listening to what people wanted, and they were sharing that with us. Our family members, whenever we were getting a new referral into our organization, I would have those new folks meet with the families that had the most challenges with our organization, because if we could work through those challenges and they still were with our organizations, we must be doing something right. So let's get them talking with each other right in the beginning to realize that we are in this together. And that really decided and created this collaborative effort that was a strong advocacy focus to really move things forward. And when we're thinking about it at a systems level from an internal standpoint, what we need to be mindful of is we need to have those people who are interacting with organizations such as quality management, licensing, monitoring. What are they doing to interact with organizations to learn? What about those who are guiding policy and practices? Are they sitting at the table and are we having conversations with them? And of course, those making rules and legislation. All of those are those system advocates that we really need to be focusing on. And what are we doing to have them at the table to learn about different things? And I think in this evolution of the final rule, one of the things that has been unfortunate is those in licensing and monitoring roles haven't been at the table enough to realize that plans are going to look different as they're coming across their desk. And one of those things that, if something looks different and I don't know about it, it must be wrong. So what can we do to help improve that? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So in the role of advocacy, what we really need to be thinking about is what are we doing to improve the effectiveness of advocacy? So how are we going about communicating with one another in a way that is collaborative as opposed to adversarial? What are we doing to collaborate? What are we doing to present the material in a way that makes sense and understand that we may not agree with it, but we at least need to be open to hearing it and not making judgments about it? And how do we maintain those professional relationships? These are things that we need to focus on to improve our advocacy system and roles. The third element we look at is trauma-informed discovery. Okay. Trauma-informed care, big buzzwords right now. And, we are living in an age of universal trauma. One of the things about the pandemic, it didn't miss anybody. We were all impacted by it. So we've all had some exposure to trauma. But we really need to recognize that our services and supports need to not only be trauma-informed for those who are using services, but also trauma-responsive for those who provide or manage the service system. How are we addressing that across the board? And when it's done well, we need to look at a system that creates psychological safety for everyone. People feel safe and they have support and positive control of their lives. And then what can we do to reinforce positive relationships? If we can focus on those three elements of safety, control, and relationships, it will mitigate the trauma response and increase resilience for folks. So what we really need to be mindful of is feeling safe is as important as being safe. And what are we doing to help people feel safe? Are we defining that as a system, or are we asking the people themselves? Can you remember in your own life a time where you didn't feel safe? And how did that impact your life? So we really want to be mindful of that. It could be something as maybe you experienced a terrible thunderstorm or the wind was so loud, you wondered if a tornado was coming. My business partner grew up in the bayous of Louisiana. And so anytime there is a hurricane alert on the news, she is already getting prepared because that's something that is really, that helps her feel safe. Whether the hurricane comes her way or not, she feels safe. So we really need to recognize that. And we need to realize that we are not experts in trauma. And so we shouldn't be trying to uncover trauma. But the reality is we will uncover somebody's trauma. And so what can we do to help them through that while we are seeking the appropriate professional help, if that's what's needed, to really help that person have a better life? Alva?
And, I think when we talk about trauma, we often don't acknowledge the trauma that having been in the system creates, right? For people who have been in the system for their whole lives and their families, we have lived a life of constantly having to advocate against the system that is supposed to be in place to help us. Or if you're a family, but to help your loved ones, right? That in and of itself can cause a form of trauma. And it's a trauma that is there because of the system, right? So if a support provider or a service that someone's been working with for a long time has constantly been adversarial towards you, or you've had to convince them of what you need or what your loved one needs or wants, that is a form of trauma, right? One of the support providers I used to work with was Department of Rehabilitation and in California. And while I think DOR is great and provides really useful services, my experience was that every time I met with my counselor, I went into those meetings already stressed because I knew from experience that from the second I opened my mouth, I was going to have to fight for what I needed. And I was going to be seen as the adversarial client who, to put it bluntly, was a pain in my counselor's ass because I wouldn't let up. And I would ask for the difficult things to get, and I would keep asking for the difficult things to ask. And knowing that I was gonna have to play that role and be in that headspace for an hour plus, even before I was in that room, I was stressed because I remember the trauma of the last meeting. And we need to be acknowledging that that's what people in the system have had to deal with just to get the basics of what we need.
And then even when they are getting the basics, I think another trauma that happens for people in our system all the time is the constant, who's working with me today? Never knowing who's going to be showing up from a staff perspective. And if somebody leaves, they've never said goodbye to the person. They just don't come back to the next shift. That is trauma. And those little t traumas, it's not a major thing that we would think of from trauma, but it is traumatic and it builds up over time and then results in those big trauma issues. So we really need to be mindful of that. So what can we do about trauma? One, we need to expect it's going to be present. Everyone has experienced some form of trauma. It's how we respond to that that really lets us know, do we need to be focused on mitigating it or not? We need to understand the causes, and we really need to recognize the short and long-term impacts of that. And then we really need to think about how we respond. So when we think about how we respond, we want to make sure that we can stop the immediate impact of it so that we can correct the course as much as we can. We want to develop and support trauma-informed practices for those who are using services and supports and those who are providing services and supports. So they've got a better understanding about what it's all about. We want to make sure that there is trauma-informed discovery and support and plans. We talk about trauma-informed care. I really like terming it trauma-informed discovery, because we may not be the caretaker for that, but we may be discovering it. What can we do to help the person through it? So we need to learn what's working as well as what's not working for the person in those situations, and then we need to apply the learning. And we can do that by focusing on those 3 key elements I mentioned earlier. This comes from the work of Dr. Karen Harvey, psychologist who's very focused and specializes in trauma. What can we do to help people feel safe? What can we do to help people have control over the situation? And what are those supportive relationships, those connections that people have? 3 key things that we can look at and start to build into the plan. And the plan really is that 4th element. And I'm not going to focus on the plan per se. More so, I'm going to focus on outcomes of the plan and what are those cultural considerations that we need to be mindful of. The plan, I think, really is the contract for providing supports to people. And so when we think about the planning meeting, how many people do we support that don't want to go to their meeting because of the past experiences they've had at their meeting? I don't know about you, but I don't really look forward to coming to a meeting where you're going to tell me all the things I do wrong and the things I need help with. Let's think about the planning process as a celebration and an exploration about what needs to evolve over the next year. And it's a great way to really get some discovery and listening going. So we really want to think about, are we really focusing on capturing who the person is? We have done a tremendous job of capturing what the person is, diagnoses, issues that need to be addressed, what things need to be fixed, but that's only a piece of the person. We want to view things holistically, and who is the person? So what can we do to start making those changes happen? And we want to think about, how do we keep the person in the center? And Alva, I'll turn this over to you because you've got more experience in that about being the center of the planning process.
Yeah, I think, the big piece about outcomes is we need to be asking the person, what are their desired outcomes, right? What do they want their life to look like? Because we as a system have done a really good job at coming up with these kind of boilerplate things that we think people should want to work on, right? We think those should be their desired outcomes, but what does the person want? What outcomes do they want? And one of the biggest holes in this transition to person-centeredness is when we're transitioning to person-centeredness, we ask people, okay, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What do you want? And we get, I don't know. And so we just say, okay, well, they don't know. Okay, go back to the old way. Well, that's because no one's ever supported them in figuring out what they want. No one has ever supported people in the system in learning and discovering what it is they want, what their goals are, what they want their life to look like. To someone that's been in the service system their whole life, that is a completely foreign concept. What? My life can look the way I want it to? What do you mean? And so part of this transition is we as support professionals are now required to support people in figuring out what they want their life to look like, figuring out the answers to what's important to them, figuring out the answer of how do you want to be supported. And that's a really big missing piece is we stop the conversation at I don't know. I don't know is the beginning of the conversation, not the end.
And that's followed up by experience, because experience helps us figure out, do I want this or do I not want this? So what are we doing to help make that happen? So if we think about outcomes, we need to recognize that they're different than goals. We've been developing goals for people for years, but we really need to think about what is the outcome. So an outcome really is what you hope to accomplish, what you want out of life. And it is the ultimate result or impact of the things that we do. So it really describes the changes the person wants. And if we ask this question, what will the person gain from the services and supports that we as a service system provide? Will that lead them to the outcome that they want for their life? And what we really need to be mindful of is what we have done is we've created outcomes and goals that are more designed around our service delivery system, such as I will obtain and maintain employment, or I will attend physical therapy, or of course, I will participate in community outings. That doesn't lead down a path to what the person wants because it doesn't even identify what the person wants. How about we look at something like this? I want to go on a date rather than learning social skills. How many of us have learned social skills because of the result of the date we went on? Yep, I'm not going to do that again. Let's practice self-defense skills rather than increase physical activity. Let's look great for school rather than improve personal hygiene. Whereas my friend's son, I want a girlfriend. So we really want to think about how do we start to tailor this and make it more specific based upon what the person wants. And then that's the outcome. The goals we develop will be the steps that what do we need to do to improve personal hygiene? What do we need to do to increase physical activity? Those are the steps that are going to lead to the outcome. So let's look at a couple of examples here and think about how you develop your goals for folks. Laura exercises in the Zumba class at the YMCA, so she meets new friends and stays fit. This helps us identify what is important to Laura. She wants to meet new friends, and what's important for Laura, she needs to stay fit. And it starts to pull it together versus which one do we typically write? And here's another example. We really need to think about how we are listening to the person. As Alva said, we capture that in the way that makes sense so it's meeting system requirements. And notice that there is no future focus in the first bullets for each of those. Because if we use that first future-centered focus, Laura will exercise. I don't know about you, but I'm a procrastinator. If I see I got more time to do that, I'm going to wait. Let's take the future out of it because this needs to happen now. And what are we going to do to make it happen now? And then we can build our scope, frequency, and duration into the goals that we develop that help us reach our outcomes. So we're still meeting Medicaid requirements and documentation requirements that we can use for data collection. So we want to think about that. The fifth element, if we've got this plan, which really should be a blueprint and a map for those who are providing supports, what we really need to think about is how do we engage those who are providing the supports, whether it's paid or unpaid. So we really want to make sure that people are making use of the plan, which means the plan needs to be a usable document versus a compliance document. And how do we make that happen? We want to efficiently contribute that the person who's actually acting on this stuff has input back into, we need to make some modifications here, rather than your plan's not for a year from now, we're going to wait. That doesn't happen. We need to make it real time. And the staff really need to recognize, use, and record the learning. One of the things that we've been very good at in our documentation processes is we capture process and we capture events. We don't capture learning. So we really want to think about how we are going to make this happen. Okay. And then we want to be mindful of how the supporters use a plan. That means it needs to be relevant. Okay. It needs to focus on exactly what Alva said. What does a person want? How do they want it to happen? When do they want it to happen? And then that can be helpful in day-to-day support. And it gives a very good description of what the provider, those who are providing supports need to do. The way if we use those red outcomes, that leaves a lot of room for me as a provider to get it wrong, because I will approach it the way I would approach exercise. And that may not work for you. Again, let's go to that platinum rule. So we want to make sure that the planning document gives clear direction on how to best support the person. And those instructions help the person get to the outcome that they want. That's really what we want to be focusing on. Okay. Element 6. Oh,
I just want to say, think how cool that is. Like, person-centeredness is literally giving us a step-by-step list of exactly what we should be doing to support someone. Like Bob said, I think that's a lot easier than us just guessing based on our experience. If we're really doing person-centered practices and capturing supports in a person-centered way in that detail and capturing those learnings, they can turn into a literal step-by-step playbook that we get to follow.
yeah. And the key is being specific.
Mm.
We take what people tell us and then we paraphrase it into generalities. And generalities lead us down a path that's full of mistakes.
Mhm.
And we can avoid that. But that means we need to start to shift our organizational culture. And organizational culture is one of those things that takes a long time to develop. It's going to take a long time to change. And a positive organizational culture really is a core element of a person-centered system. And leaders really need to be mindful and focused on what is happening that's creating a negative organizational culture, such as, using fear-based management. We're probably not going to get a lot of honesty if there's a fear-based management system. People are going to hide their mistakes. And so what we really need to be mindful of is the organizational culture really helps us identify what is encouraged or discouraged in an organization, what's accepted or rejected. And it's typically not the platitudes that we have on the wall. It's really how we treat each other. And if we don't address the organizational culture, I don't care how much strategy you have to be a person-centered organization, culture is a silent killer of change. It will cause us to just keep things the way they are. In my organization, we took over another organization. And so I had a lot of employees who were coming to a very person-centered organization that we created. And they were fearful about that. I'm going to lose my job. What's going to happen? We're not going to do things the same. And one of the things that we see in an organizational culture that's not very healthy is a lot of rumors, right? And the thing about rumors become gossip. And then gossip becomes gospel. So I can't tell you how many things Bob said that Bob never even thought of. So to address that, we actually created a board in our office that we called the rumor mill. And anytime we heard a rumor, we would put it up on the board, and then underneath it, we would put the actual facts so people could get a sense of what was happening, what was real and what was not. And it started to get rid of the rumoring because people knew we were going to address it. And it created a much healthier culture. So when we think about this, the impacts of organizational culture is huge. Employees will leave an organization that's got a bad culture. And what we tend to find is the bad employees drive out the good. And we know we are in a time where we need to have all the staff we can, and we need to make sure that they're good staff. So it's one of the most important driving factors that really help our organization thrive. And unhealthy cultures really creates bad results and unhappy employees. Fear-based management, if we have a blame culture that's going on, one of the things we often see in organizations are crisis culture. We're just putting out fires rather than really taking the time to address the core issue. We think that's a luxury when actually that's a necessity. So we just go about putting out the fires. And the thing about a crisis culture, it becomes addictive. So if I don't have a crisis going on, I need to create one because I don't know what to do. Instead, we want to create a healthy culture because that has good results and happy employees. And it focuses on learning and accountability and partnership. So what can we do to help make that happen? So element 7 really is all about alignment.
Sorry,
Yep.
can I add something
Yep.
real quick? I think a really important piece of this is and tying it back to leadership is that a big piece that needs to change as leaders is your sense of authority needs to change and really transition to one about collaboration and working with your staff together to really identify what that looks like and how that works in your organization so that the people who are actually doing the work, and I think Bob spoke to this earlier, where he at his organization really has that collaborative approach. So what are the people that are actually doing the work that executes on that newfound mission, vision, values, or the interpretation? Do they have a say in how that's being executed? Um, because there's no way, at least successfully in the long run, to make that execution happen if the people doing it are not on board. And I can attest to the adage that people who are committed to this work will leave if they don't feel heard. And if you're in a position of authority, if your authority doesn't adapt to acknowledge and include those people, because if they don't feel heard and valued and they're really committed to this work, they're gonna leave. And I think that's a really important aspect that people don't think about, is that if your authority silences those gem employees who are really committed to this work, they're gonna leave and find an organization that values that. Or in my case, they're gonna start their own business and go and do it themselves and make a whole lot of money doing what they know is right and what they believe in. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
both of us. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So as we think about this, the next element we need to be mindful of is alignment. And part of the definition of the system is that it's got multiple parts, and these parts work together. Well, these parts are supposed to work together. I don't know if we always accomplish that, because what we find is where the parts work together well, the system's effective and efficient. Where they don't work so well together, where they don't create positive pressure in the direction of the vision, you get inefficiency and dysfunction. And this can be within an organization. You know, if we think about, if you got multiple departments in your organization, are they siloed, or are they really working and collaborating with each other so that we can streamline our processes? How are we streamlining our processes at a systems level? You know, as a provider, I would work in different catchment areas. Each different catchment area had a different set of rules that still met the same regulations, but each of those different rules caused me as a provider to have multiple operating systems just to capture the same data. How effective and how efficient is that? What can we do to start to streamline things at a state level, at a department level, so we're all moving in the same direction? And what we really need to be mindful of is that alignment really creates pressure. All right, so we can approach it from two standpoints. We can approach it, and we're seeing this now with the implementation of the HCBS rules. We can look at compliance pressure, where we get transactional change, where we have some change in rules and policy. So what can we do to just meet the minimum and still be in compliance? And we can do that without investing in the underlying values. This whole final settings rule really is to think about creating a person-centered system. And we know there are organizations, there are people, there are stakeholders who really believe in that. And then we have those who everything's fine the way it is. What do I need to change so I can meet the requirements I need to meet without changing my practice? You know, that's like rearranging the furniture in your living room. It's still the same old furniture. What we really want to think about is, what are we doing to create positive pressure to create this alignment? And this is where we buy into what the changes, they make sense. We really want to do it. And so we want to meet the intent. And that means we need to go beyond the minimum expectations. And from a monitoring standpoint, are we increasing the expectations? A lot of times what we do is we look at ground level, and if you meet that, you're doing okay. You know, that's not the ceiling, that's the ground. If you're not doing that, you probably shouldn't be in business. What are we doing to go beyond that to meet the expectations and what we really want to see happen? And in order to do that, we need to help people understand that the benefit is worth it. This whole what's in it for me. You know, I'm a firm believer and have been for a long time, and I've been a practitioner of person-centered practice for a long time. If you build it, they will come. And once people realize they've got choice, they're having experiences that are leading to full lives where they have control of their lives, those providers who are not doing this probably won't have a base of people to provide supports to any longer until they make the shift. And that's the buy-in. But do we need to wait that long? What can we do to really help move this forward and really create that buy-in? And we need to make sure that that pressure is sustained. So we don't want to do the cosmetic changes. What we really want to do, we don't want to just, you know, this slide here is two approaches that we often see for those who are just going to do the minimum. I'm going to just make the changes I need to so I look good and I meet the requirements, or I'm just going to stick my head in the sand and not say anything until it all blows over because I know this is going to go away. It's just the flavor of the month. Well, it is now federal regulation, so it's not going to blow over. So we really need to think about what are we going to do to make that happen. So what we really need to be mindful of is we need to have alignment with our vision and our practice. We can't have a great vision and then still do an old practice. We really need to think about how we create that alignment. We really need to think about how that aligns with state requirements. And what is the state looking for? What are the feds looking for to really make this happen? And we are actually in a very awesome time right now with state and federal requirements because they haven't been set in stone yet. People are still trying to figure out what does a guidance look like to really move this forward, which means those of us who are doing this, let's have some conversations with those who are putting it in paper and making it set in stone so that we're getting the good practice that we want. It's a great opportunity for us to show off the great things that we're doing and why it makes sense. So we really want to look at that. And as we think about this, we want to think about quality management. Quality management is key. And those who are engaged in quality management, we're often looking at what's wrong, and that tends to reinforce a blame culture. We're kind of in this gotcha mindset. You're not meeting this requirement. You're not meeting this requirement. Oh, you didn't meet this standard. And rather than looking for opportunities for improvement, so we can align it with the vision. Good quality management systems really are looking at how are people getting engaged in the in-depth analysis of what's going on and what's not going on. What can we do to really look at quality management as technical assistance and really focusing on how can we improve this? Let's focus on where there are opportunities for improvement as opposed to, gotcha, didn't do it. So quality management, it really, again, needs to work from an alignment perspective. What we really want to be mindful of. Person-centered plans are our main focus of the final rule, and the outcomes need to address what the person wants and be based upon what's important to someone. But quality needs to address the health and safety and the active habilitation, but it's got to be in context to what the person wants. And so what can we do to make that happen? So how do we look at rules and regulations and outcomes based upon what the person wants with the quality of how they're being provided? That's it. That intersection really is where we get the alignment that we really want. And so that means we need to go from a system that measures standards and process. We look at paperwork compliance. We look at minimal standards where they're viewed as a ceiling rather than the floor. We looked at goals that are focused on scope, frequency, and duration. And we look for what's wrong. So that's standards and process. Did it happen when you said it was going to happen? For how long it's going to happen? That doesn't capture anything from a person-centered standpoint. What we really need to be mindful of is how are we starting to capture outcomes and satisfaction? Are we looking at the important twos, the things that people want in their life to be happy, content, and satisfied? And does that create a path that outcomes are related to those important two, and that the health and safety is provided in the context with that? So, for example, if I tell you that I live in Colorado, love to go skiing, I break my leg, my goal is not to attend physical therapy and get full range of motion. My outcome is to be back on the slopes when it's snowing again. So that's my outcome. One of my goals would be to attend physical therapy so I can get that range of motion. And so I can keep data collection on that, but does it lead to the satisfaction? Does it lead to the outcome that I want? And so we really need to be mindful of how are we capturing quality and satisfaction from the services and supports that we are providing. And we haven't done that. It may be happening in pockets, but I don't think we've created a structure for that. And I'll be honest, it's really challenging because quality management systems are like black and white. It happened or it didn't happen. You passed, you failed. And that works really well in our traditional system that we've had for a long time. But when we are looking at a person-centered system, black and white goes out the window because person-centeredness is shades of gray. So how are we going to capture those shades of gray? That's satisfaction and quality of what's happening. So it's a bit of a shift about how we need to approach this. And if we focus on those things, then I think we can get a quality management system that captures, again, we'll capture the health and safety stuff. We have to do that. But we also want to make sure that that health and safety is leading to happiness and contentment and people having control over their lives. They're connected. Alva, anything you want to add to that before I move on to the last element?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the last element is leaders. As I said at the beginning of this, it begins and ends with leaders. And leaders really appear at the front end and the back end because we really want to make sure that leaders are mindful of all of the other 8 elements and are invested in the elements and are responsible for the attention to addressing those elements so that they actually move in the direction you want. And so what we want to be mindful of is leaders can really create and have influence on the work atmosphere or the culture that can support or negate the change you want. Okay. Those who are happy with the way things are, they don't see any need to change, often have an environment of cynical discontent where, what we're doing is fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. I've been working with in every organization I work with says we're person-centered, but then as we dig into it, their definition of person-centered is very superficial. As you're hearing, there's much more nuance and depth to it that we really need to look at, which means we need to look at all aspects of our system. So we really want to make sure that we are not getting any of that denial. We're already doing it, so I don't know why we need to do anything different. Or we get some distortion of things where, hey, people are happy with the way we're doing things around here. Oh, how do you know? Oh, I asked them. Well, if people aren't comfortable telling the truth, of course they're going to tell you, I'm happy with the way things are. Except Alva. Alva will let you know what's going on, right?
True.
And as we've talked about, the good people leave in those cynical, discontent environments. What we want to do as leaders is create hope and build trust in our organization that things are going to change and it's going to take time. So we need to be honest. We need to be mindful. We need to be transparent as the leader to say, this is where we're doing really well. This is where we're struggling. This is where we need help. Who's got some ideas? Leaders take a lot on their shoulders rather than sharing that with everyone in the organization to think about, let's brainstorm this together. Because typically, people who are closer to the issue have a much better solution It's probably a $5 solution as opposed to a $5,000 solution. A lot of times when there's issues in organizations, we get two responses. I need more money or I need more staff. Reality is there is no more money, there is no more staff. So what can we do differently to help make things happen in a way that makes sense? And that means it really is focused on commitment. We really need to make sure that we are going to be a proponent of change, where we're going to advocate for change, that we are going to support the expectations of those change, both internally and then talking with the system that we need to be talking with and starting to collaborate. You know, I think one of the things that often happens from a commitment standpoint is leaders, I find that there's two camps leaders can be in. There are leaders that say, you know, the rule says the rule doesn't say we can do it, so we can't do it. And I am a firm believer in the opposite. If the rule doesn't tell me I can't do it, then I can do it. Rules are created not with every single situation in mind. It's impossible to do that. So there's a guideline. So we really need to think about what is the intent of the rule that we're looking at. And let's work in conjunction with the rule makers to say, I think this is how I meet the intent of the rule. What do you think? Because it will lead to different creative practices that support people in a way that makes sense. And so that means we need to be engaged. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to add, I think being able to shift your mindset to really see those people that come to you and say, this isn't working, we should be doing this differently. Being able to see those people as an asset instead of the broken wheel or the squeaky wheel, rather. That's one of the biggest changes in leadership mindset that will make this whole thing go smoothly. Because the people that see that it's broken are the ones more often than not that have ideas on how to fix it.
Right. Yeah. And that's where you become the change target. You make changes yourself. So you become a role model to really make that happen. I started my own agency because I wanted to be a role model to show how it could happen. Elva's a role model in her advocacy, in her personal life, to really make change happen. So that means we really need to be mindful about how to make this happen. And of course, it's not all unicorn and roses, folks. You know, what we really need to be mindful of, we need to expect resistance. That lets us know that we are doing a good job because people are struggling with the changes that we're trying to create. Mm-hmm. If we don't get resistance, it means people are just giving us lip service and nothing's going to change. So let's embrace that resistance and see where it's coming from so we can really make that happen. Okay. And so, as I said, it all begins and ends with leadership. And so as leaders of those of you who are in leadership roles, whether it's at a supervisory level or an exec level, what changes can you make to really help set this in motion? And I know Saskia is going to be putting stuff in the chat, but here's some resources that are also in the PowerPoint. And our company, Support Development Associates, does a lot of work with state systems and organizational providers to really help implement all of this stuff. So hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully it got you thinking about things. I'm going to leave our contact information up here, and we've got some time for questions if people have questions. Any closing thoughts, Ava, before we get to questions?
No.
I just want to say while we wait for some questions, thank you so much, Bob and Alva. I want to reiterate there's so much appreciation for you in the chat. And someone said that they needed this inspiration today. I needed this inspiration today. I think many of us who have worked in the field for a while know that it can be really challenging sometimes, right? When we think about how we can incorporate person-centered practices into our systems, and it's an uphill struggle often. So thank you. I really myself got so much out of this presentation, and I was taking down notes the whole time as well. So really grateful to you both for that. I think you got to the heart of why we do what we do. and the perspective that we need to take to build person-centered systems. So thank you so much to you. And thank you also to the attendees. So many reflective, wonderful, thoughtful comments in chat. We really appreciate it. All right, let me see. I did pull a couple of questions, and I'm seeing a few come in as well. I'd like to address this question that just came in from Chris in the chat because I was curious about this too. So earlier, Bob, you had shared a couple of examples of goals, right? That blue text versus red text. And I think what people were picking up on, right, is that some of those very stringent, rigid goals were likely following the SMART format that I know many states continue to use today. So one of the questions that it came in was, how can we use person-centered language while continuing to comply with Medicaid or expectations for Medicaid? Although I will say really quickly, I'm just going to throw in here, there's no expectation regulation that you have to use SMART goals. But I'll open it up to you, Bob, in terms of how we can ensure compliance,
Sure.
but still be person-centered.
Sure. So you know how I said each of those elements is at least its own day training? We've got a whole day about talking about how we can make that happen. But quickly, using SMART goals is fine, but those SMART goals have to be connected to an outcome, and that's what's missing. We need to have the outcome first, and then the SMART goals get us to the outcome. And an outcome may not happen in a year, but those SMART goals can be addressed in shorter duration. So it's all building upon itself. That's a simple answer.
And I always say, think about the why, right? So the why of someone working on it, the outcome is also the why. And like Bob said, and I have a training about SMART goals as well. Like you can absolutely do a SMART goal in a person-centered way as long as the why acknowledges that person-centered aspect.
Great. Thank you both. All right. Bob and Alva, do you have one tip to help case managers shift towards more of person-centered engagement with the people that they support? What is, one takeaway or suggestion that you might have for even just starting that process?
Alva, you want to take that one?
This is also a full day training.
Yep.
And there's some requests in chat that we can continue, right? Because there's a lot to say. Yeah.
I think what I find most often with case managers or whatever term your state or county uses, the biggest challenge that they face when it comes to taking person-centered approach starts with how they facilitate conversations. And I think facilitation and really shifting how you think about facilitating the conversation and facilitating the dynamic between all the players in the room, that really sets, or I should say, begins to set that foundation for creating a space and a context that allows for person-centered approaches and person-centered conversations. Because if you can't facilitate a group that is going to agree or disagree, right? It's not a question of if they will, they will. But if you can facilitate that space and maintain in any way the person-centered element and keeping the person at the center, then you're already doing a really good first step to change the conversation.
Yeah, I would build on that. It really is about the discovery. I think the case manager has a very tough role There's lots of things that they need to be doing, and the planning process has become a task rather than a plan. And so really thinking about how, as a case manager, you can be the conduit for all the information that people have. And so those people can be sending you that information ahead of time. People that we call content experts, people who know and care about the person and knows what needs to go into the plan to help the person have the life that they want. First and foremost, the ultimate content expert is the person themselves. And how do we take that information, and then as a case manager, you transpose it to meet the regulatory requirements? I think that's one way you can do that. But if people can send that information to you ahead of time, and then at the meeting, you say, okay, so I've received this information, let's talk about it. And that could help things go a little bit better. It's challenging. I know that there's a lot of competing demands for case management. It's which crisis du jour you're dealing with at any given time. And so how do you do that? Try to spread the wealth among the team members and recognize that they've got a lot of knowledge that isn't about, can the person sit on a ball? Can they use a fork? Can they tie their shoe? That, that's not what should be in the plan. That's an assessment. Let's think about what really is going to help the person be the person they want to be.
Thank you so much.
I was right. 1 day, 2 day training. Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap here with one final question. I know that many have come in last minute. And of course, we encourage you, reach out to Bob, reach out to Alva in case we aren't able to get to your exact question today. But I think some of the questions that came in through chat really touch on this, which is, what are some methods? What are some ways that we can really facilitate the shift from compliance pressure to that positive pressure that you talked about? I mean, I think some of the conversation that we've already had here points to that, but, for any folks out there who are state human service agency representatives who are sitting there saying, absolutely, I agree with this, but how can I really integrate this into my system? Any additional thoughts that you would like to share as we close?
Again, using the elephant analogy, you're not going to eat the whole elephant all at once. It's one bite at a time. Mm-hmm. And so the thing to really think about is something that we refer to as level 1 changes. What's something different that you could do that you don't have to ask anybody's permission for, and it would have the impact that you want? And then let's start there, and then we can build from that. So let's take it one bite at a time. Let's find out where's something simple that you could do. Don't have to ask anybody's permission and has the outcome you want.
And I think a great example of that one bite at a time that you don't need permission for, that I have both seen and experienced have a huge impact, is starting a planning event or an ISP meeting or whatever by having everyone go around and share what they like and admire about the person. From the jump, you create a space where you're acknowledging what's awesome about that person. And you'll be amazed at what that very simple change, that shift that it creates in the room for the rest of the conversation, I can't put into words. And it takes maybe 10 minutes at the beginning of a meeting.
Yeah. And if you're not working directly with a person, you could do that at a department meeting or a team meeting. I mean, how often do we compliment our coworkers?
Yeah.
Well, we're complimenting them today because thank you so much, right, Bob and Alva, for all of your fantastic work on this presentation. And once again, gratitude to you. I've really enjoyed this and taken so much out of it as well. So with that, before you leave, I know we've got a minute left, but we would love if you could just respond to a quick post-webinar evaluation that should have just popped up on your screen. We'd love to hear how your experience was during the webinar today. and if you have any additional recommendations for us. But with that, once again, thank you so much for being here at today's webinar. The recording, the slides, and any additional materials will be sent out tomorrow. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.